the $100 MBA Show, and today is a Q&A Weekends episode where we answer your question right here on the show. If you have a question you want to ask, just email us at support@businessrepublic.net. As always, I'm your host, your coach, your teacher, Omar Zenhom. I'm also the co-founder of the $100 MBA, a complete business training and community online. You can check out our free course and our free guides over at 100mba.net. Today's question comes from Vicky, and Vicky asks, how much does it cost to start and run a podcast? Good question, Vicky. I'll be sharing exact numbers of how much it costs to start a podcast as well as run one. I'll give you some different options depending on your budget, as well as what it means for your time, because it's not just money you're spending. I'll also give you my recommendations when it comes to what to start with in terms of equipment and technology so you can sound your best when you're still on a budget. All right, guys, let's get into it. Let's get down to business. Today's episode of the $100 MBA Show is sponsored by Acuity Scheduling, our favorite scheduling app because it's easy to use and it's easy for your clients to use. If you're in a service-based business and you need people to book you for your time, nothing is easier than Acuity Scheduling. Just give them your link and they can book you right on your calendar. It's also great for just managing your calendar. But don't take my word for it. Give it a try for free. Acuity Scheduling is giving a free offer for $100 MBA listeners for a limited time. So sign up now for a 45-day free trial. Head on over to acuityscheduling.com/MBA. That's ACUITY scheduling.com/MBA. So Vicky asks, how much does it cost to start and to run a podcast? So we're going to break this down into those two parts, or those two categories. How much it is to get started, because you're going to need some startup equipment, one-time costs type of things, and then how much is going to cost you month in, month out to run your podcast. Now, it's really hard for me to answer this question directly because I don't know what the podcast exactly is. Is it a solo show? Is it a discussion show? Is it an interview show? What's the frequency of the show? Is it once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, daily? All these factors will influence the cost. But for the sake of this lesson, I'm going to keep things simple. I'm going to assume that this is a weekly podcast, which is the most common frequency in podcasting. And I'm going to assume that this is an interview show, which is also the most common format in podcasting. So the way I like to break down podcasting is into 3 parts, and it's just like any production. And those 3 parts are pre-production, recording, and post-production. Let me break down quickly what those 3 parts really mean. So pre-production is everything that goes before you actually get on the mic and record the podcast. Whether it's a solo show or an interview show, there is pre-production that takes place. Things you have to do before you actually get started on the mic. Things like deciding on the topic, deciding on the guest, reaching out to the guest, booking the time. Acuity Scheduling would be really good with that, our sponsor today. I digress, but really, it's awesome. You also may want to outline or write down the questions that you're going to be asking that guest. Anything that has to do with preparing for the actual show is pre-production. Then there's the recording. So that's when you actually get on the mic and record the actual podcast. You interview the actual guest and the magic happens, right? Then post-production is where the real magic happens. And those are things like editing or ID3ing. This is how you tag your actual audio file. Things like adding the episode to your website or making sure it's part of the RSS feed so when people subscribe to the show, they get the episode automatically. If you're putting this episode on your blog, there's descriptions you have to write, show notes, the links that you mention on the show, a feature image. And this is just stuff just to produce the actual podcast. And this is all without including the idea of having sponsorship on your podcast. That's a whole different gambit. And we're not going to include that because you can have a podcast without sponsors. The $100 MBA Show for almost 100 episodes didn't have a single sponsor. So let's just put that aside. So what do you need for pre-production? Well, when it comes to planning, emailing, things like that, that's pretty much basic. We all have email pretty much, right? We all have access to some sort of document or word processing software, whether that's Word or Google Docs, and you can plan out your episode on those things. You can use a scheduling app like Acuity Scheduling to schedule your actual interviews. All that's in the pre-production, and the cost is pretty minimal there. So I'm not even going to factor that in because most of us have all these things for free. Even the scheduling app, Acuity Scheduling, is super inexpensive, and it's free for the first 45 days. So just to get started, it's all good. And even if you don't use a scheduling app for any reason, you can actually run the podcast without it and just manage on your own calendar. It's a little bit inconvenient for the guest, but it's not impossible. Okay, let's talk about production or recording. You're going to need a quality mic. There's a lot of different mics out there you can use for podcasting. There's really expensive ones and there's really cheap ones. And there's really bad quality ones. What I recommend is a mic called Audio-Technica ATR 2100. It's a very good quality mic for the price. And a lot of podcasters getting started use this because they sound great in it, if they're in a quiet area. And a lot of them don't ever graduate from it because it's just so good. It's about $58 on Amazon right now. So it's really inexpensive for a quality mic. The Audio-Technica ATR 2100 comes with a USB connection as well as an XLR connection. So if you want to go bare minimum, you just need to plug it into your computer and you can record it. Record it into what software? We'll talk about that next. I also mentioned the Audio-Technica comes with an XLR connection. That means you can connect it into a audio recorder instead of your laptop. We use an audio recorder called a Zoom H4n. Now we do this because the quality of an audio recorder is going to be better than your laptop because there's no hissing of the computer or the fan or any of that stuff. Having said that, for most listeners of podcasts, they really can't tell the difference. This is really getting technical. So the Zoom is really not that mandatory. It's $160 on Amazon, so you can bypass that. You don't have to worry about that right now. You can think about doing that later on if you'd like. And if you're doing an interview show, it gets even more complicated with the H4n. So you might as well just plug into your laptop because if you're doing an interview show, you're going to need to use a call recorder. And that's a software by Ecamm called Call Recorder. And it basically records the audio of any call on Skype. And many interview shows do this. Most interview shows do this setup. This software called Call Recorder by Ecamm, it's about $30. Really inexpensive. And what it does is it records both sides of the conversation. So your audio and the guest's audio. You can take those files and edit. We're going to get to that later because that's post-production editing. So we got a mic. We have Ecamm if we're having an interview show. We have a scheduling app if we want to use that. What else? Okay, let's get into post-production. You're going to need a software to edit. Now, if you're on a Mac, then GarageBand is more than enough. You can edit in GarageBand. It's free. If you're not on a Mac or you don't have GarageBand, you can use something called Audacity, which is free to download. It's open source. It's not the most sophisticated audio editing software, but it will do the job. And you can drop your tracks in there and edit. Now, if you do not know how to edit, you can learn. And there's plenty of tutorials on like lynda.com to learn how to use software like GarageBand or Audacity. If you really want to geek out on editing, I recommend Apple's Logic. I think it's one of the best audio editing softwares out there. Another popular choice is Adobe Audition. And Adobe has cloud services now, so you can pay monthly. And Audition is about $20 a month. But that's really if you want to go all out and geek out. But plenty of people edit their podcasts in Audacity or GarageBand. There are other softwares out there as well, but let's keep it simple right now. Okay, now you have your actual podcast episode. It's all edited up, right? The next thing you would need is an ID3 editor. And this is like just tagging your file, your podcast episode with the right information, like the cover art and the title of the actual episode. And you can find ID3 editors on the internet ranging at different prices. They start around $15. Or you can find a completely free one, a legally free one, on the internet somewhere if you do a search on Google. It's out there. All right, let's talk about post-production. When it comes to post-production, this is where the reoccurring costs go when it goes to running your actual podcast past the launch or past the start. And that's your hosting. You got to host your podcast on a hosting provider. You can't just host it on your site because it's not fast enough. You need something that's just dedicated to streaming audio. Just like YouTube is to video, you need a host for audio. And there's a whole bunch of different options. So when it comes to hosting, there's two big players. There's a lot of choices, but these are the two big players, Libsyn and SoundCloud. Libsyn has plans as low as $5 a month. And it's all about storage, how many megabytes. Now, if you don't know how large your actual file is, or how large your actual episode is, you're going to have to make one episode at least so you know. Now, our episodes are about 10-15 minutes. They're compressed properly, and they're good quality, and they're about 10 megabytes. So if our show was weekly, the classic $5 a month on Libsyn would have been fine because they have up to 50 MBs of storage on that classic $5 plan. They have other plans that are 15, 20, 40, 75, depending on how much storage you need, and they can customize it for you. SoundCloud is another option. SoundCloud has a pretty simple 2-tiered plan. They have a low-cost $5 plan and an unlimited $15 plan. I'm going to let you do the homework on that one and choose one. But the point is that when you're just getting started and it's a weekly podcast, you're not going to spend more than $15 a month, whatever you choose. Now, that's just the out-of-pocket expenses. What about your time? What about if you want other people to be involved and help you with the production of the show, whether it's editing or creating show notes or creating feature images for each episode or getting a virtual assistant to help you secure guests or thank them for their time? I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but before that, let me give love to today's sponsor, Braintree. You remember the first dollar you made when you started your business? Now you want to grow to make your billionth. Have you found the right partner to grow with you? Braintree lets you accept every way to pay, from PayPal to Apple Pay and everything in between. All it takes is one integration. And it doesn't matter what currency your customers use, because Braintree lets you accept over 130 of them. They even help you allow to accept Bitcoin. To learn more about how your company can grow with Braintree, visit BraintreePayments.com/MBA. Again, that's BraintreePayments.com/MBA. Guys, to wrap up today's lesson, you can run your podcast. You could start your podcast and run it all on your own. Nicole and I did it for a very long time. It was just me and Nicole. In fact, for the first 300 episodes or so, Nicole and I did everything, the pre-production, the production, the recording, the post-production, every single thing. From the show notes to the images to everything, we put it all together ourselves. But then we got to a point where we needed to grow and we decided to hire some people to help us out. And to be quite honest, it's very hard to run a daily podcast if you don't have some help. So you may want to consider that down the line, but when you're first getting started, I recommend you do it yourself because you want to be able to know the ins and outs of your podcast so you can train the person that you hire in the future. All right, guys, I hope that helps, and I hope you loved Q&A Weekends. Make sure you tune in tomorrow because we got a great guest teacher episode with bestseller, New York Times bestseller, Tucker Max. And Tucker Max will teach you how to write your book 10 times faster and better. He's going to give you his formula, the formula that he actually charges for. So you're going to want to tune in for that, so make sure you hit subscribe. All right, guys, that wraps up today's lesson. I hope you loved it. Before I go, I want to leave you with this. I know it sounds daunting, a lot of moving parts when it comes to podcasting. But once you learn it, once you get into the groove and know how to do it, it's just like everything else. It's a routine. And I'm sure down the line, it's going to get easier. Now, I also want to mention that in today's episode, you might be thinking, well, how do I submit my podcast? What do I do? Now, that's a different episode, and we've touched on it a lot of times in previous episodes, but I just want to cover the costs in today's episode. All right, guys, I'll check you tomorrow. Tucker Max, guest teacher. Can't wait. I'll see you then. Take care.